My caffeine has officially kicked in. That makes me happy. All right. Hey, everybody. We are live. We're live. So welcome all who have joined. Very excited to see you all here. This is going to be a very interactive live, and Belle and I are coming to you from Los Angeles, California, Marina Del Rey, California, America. And I have the amazing Miss Belle coming all the way from Rwanda. We love what we do. As you can see, we are ourselves. We are going to come here as ourselves, and we are going to have open dialogue, full transparency, unfiltered, unadulterated conversations. This is a safe space. The LYF Matters community is a very safe community. It's meant to be honest. It's a safe space for vulnerability. And we're going to talk about life and leadership. For all of you guys who don't know, loving yourself first is what life is all about. And there's a way to love yourself in leadership, love yourself in relationships, loving yourself, in this experience called, life, and how we move and navigate through it. And the theme for July is belief systems. That's what we're going to start with, and we're going to dive into that. If you're not following any of our social media links, you should, because we're going to be giving life tips, lots of information, a lot of healthy dialogue around belief systems, limited and negative belief systems, as well as conditioned programming, and how that plays a role in the choices that you make and the decisions, what you allow, what you tolerate, and then some. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Miss Belle so that she can talk a little bit more about what she believes belief systems are, and conditioned programming, and life and leadership, and our empowerment programming community. Belle.
Thank you, Kiona, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you guys are calling in from. We're so excited about what we're doing here. We've really been behind the scenes trying to come up with different programs to really target women in particular. So I know you guys have been enjoying the lives, which will be, end of this month. We'll have another live around the topic. What we're doing on these life and leadership sessions, which we are starting today. So we're really excited about that. And they were going to be monthly as well. It's really an opportunity for us to really engage at a different level. And we'll be having young, leaders joining us as well.
Yep.
We wanted to set the tone on this conversation. So keep dialing in. So there's going to be this conversation, and also our live sessions, which take place on Sundays. So this month, as Kiona said, we're really focused on belief systems, which I think is so fundamental, because so much of the actions that we take are based on the way we think, and the way we think is rooted in something that we've come to believe. And often these things happen when we're really young, or going through a season where we don't really even recognize that we are absorbing belief systems. And so I'm really excited about this month. I know I'm going to learn a lot. Kiona is like Miss Emotional Intelligence Extraordinaire. And so I'm always excited to partner with her on these things, because we love what we do for young women. We're excited about growing women, becoming more confident. And as I always say, even as we do these sessions and we talk to our different women and we do training for young people and corporates, we're also learning. So this is going to be a super, super month. And I think, belief systems is really fundamental to everything. So I'm excited that we're putting a whole month just dedicated to this topic. Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of stuff on social media. So please, watch the space and engage. This is not supposed to be a one-sided thing. Like, you guys should be engaging, learning, sharing, commenting, questioning, challenging, right? So be proactive, not just on this session, but throughout the month of July. But I'm excited.
I'm excited too. So like Belle said, look, if you guys have any questions, put it in the chat box. I am answering as many questions as possible.
Yeah.
I will answer them live. I will try to talk to you in the chat. If there's anything that you want to know or you want me to kind of explain further, or you want Val to explain further, we're giving our perspectives with what it is that we do. You guys know that I'm a certified neuro-linguistic programming practitioner and emotional intelligence coach. I counsel individuals, corporate staff, upper and middle management, as well as relationships, right? I love relationships. I love talking about relationships. I love how to talk about cultivating relationships, and not just intimate relationship, but the relationship that you have with yourself, the relationship that you have with friends, like your colleagues. Those are relationships that you have, and you actually spend 40 hours sometimes or more with your colleagues. So those relationships are really healthy as well. And the relationships that you have with family, and when it comes to work, not just your colleagues, but your supervisors, right? But again, it all starts with the relationship that you have with yourself, loving yourself first, knowing yourself first. I said something earlier about, self-awareness, and a part of self-awareness is understanding, the participation and the kind of the role you play in the outcomes that you experience in your life. And I think it's really important to understand that your belief systems play a role in, like I said, the choices and decisions that you make. For those who are not aware of belief systems, belief systems are kind of like, like I said, a set of ideas and thoughts that we kind of hold regarding ourselves and others and the world around us, right? It's how we look through the lenses and how we interpret everything, how we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves. It's really important to understand that when it comes to relationships with ourselves, like, our belief systems impact how we perceive ourselves, how we value ourselves, and how we value others. The language, I always say language is really important. You know how a person feels about themselves and their mindset and their belief systems, whether they are limited, right? Based off of the dialogue in which they describe things when it comes to themselves, how they describe things when it comes to opportunities that you have in life, and how we're able to kind of relate to people and empathize with people who are different from us. My belief system when it comes to myself, I kind of love anybody. I love everybody, and I'm very open-minded when it comes to the relationships I have with others. And you see that in how I treat other people. I was able to meet Belle and love her immediately, right? And she actually gets to experience the overflow of the love that I have for myself, because I believe I'm deserving of healthy relationships, because I deserve a healthy relationship with myself. Do you think the same thing? Do you believe that? No.
I do, and I think when I was thinking about this session, I was reading something, an interview I saw of Michael Rubin, and they were asking him, he does a whole bunch of things, and they were say the interviewer was saying to him, you are doing so much, how do you live your life, etc. And he started talking about fear, and he said, I'm not afraid of anything. Like, I am not afraid of risk. I have zero fear. And it made me think that a lot of the times, and I look at myself as an African, as a woman, and as a woman of faith, you know, when he said that, like, I have no fear. I don't believe in fear. I just take risks. I realized like how much of my belief system as that three layered thing, African woman, woman of faith, was so rooted in risk aversion and rooted in a bit of fear, and it was things like people saying like, oh, just be careful. Oh, be careful. Oh, you're a woman. Oh, be careful, And sometimes some of these things, they're not out of a bad place.
Yeah.
But it creates in us this sort of timidity and caution and whatever. And it was weird listening to him say that. And I thought, God, I had to work through so many of these layers to get to the point where I said, I don't believe that about myself. I believe I am a strong woman, very feminine, but a strong woman. I believe I add value. I believe I bring good perspective. You know, I don't cower as an African woman because you're taught me like, oh, you know, just you know, just don't, try not to be too loud, try not to be
Yeah,
seen. It's like, no, my perspective is valid. You know, I'm a woman. I'm a great leader in the
yeah,
way I lead as a woman. I don't have to mimic leading as a man. And so I feel like sometimes those were things that were said in a negative way. You know, certainly, even as a Christian, I have to say like, where is this fear coming from? Because I can do all things in Christ. I don't have to walk in fear. I can walk in faith, right? And you have to like get yourself to, you know, to really believe who you are and reevaluate some of the things that you hear or are said to you, or are said to you not in words but are said to you in the community that you grew up, that says don't be too loud, don't be too seen, don't do this, don't do this, right?
mhm,
And reframe what you think about yourself and allow yourself to live your most, you know, authentic um, expression, because like you said, you can only overflow from who you are, and I think a lot of us don't do that because we're still living in these sort of like box lives. But yeah, it really made me think, you know, some people just live that fearless life. I don't think I'm like, oh, you know, I am definitely not fearless like he is, but I certainly saw my own journey from where I think I started to where I am now, and being able to say like, I don't believe those things that people said about me or people said I should believe because of those three layers: being African, being woman, being a woman of faith.
mhm.
What I believe about myself, and I will incubate what I believe about myself so that that becomes who I am, you know.
Yeah.
So I 100% agree, 100% agree.
Yeah, I always say that, I try to be mindful about my dialogue. You know what I mean? I believe that words have a lot of power.
Very
And,
much, very much.
I tend to challenge belief systems. I always tell people, when you say things and you really like stop and ask yourself and check your thought process, it's kind of like, why is my mindset this
Yeah,
way? Why do I
yeah,
believe this? Who
yeah,
taught me this? And
yeah,
and even though I was taught certain things, right? What is the evidence that I see consistently that makes those things facts in my life that I have to take them on as, life confirmations? And a lot of times it's the conditioning. It's saying, this is what we always do. We always go
yeah,
to church on Sunday. We always, you
yeah,
know, we always do this on certain days, and we always eat like this, and we always drink that and dress this way, and so on and so forth. But
yeah,
understanding your own identity, understanding who you are, and challenging those beliefs to make sure that those beliefs belong to you and that those are not just implanted seeds. Because the thing about belief systems is, if you challenge them, right, and you realize those opinions are not mine and I can change them.
yeah,
I've always thought this way, or this is how I've always been. You can change those things. And when you can change your mindset, eh, you can change your life, because you can change your outcome,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely,
And I always use this like NLP process, where it's looking at a situation, right? You have a situation. How you think about that situation will dictate how you feel about the
so
situation.
true,
How you feel and think about the situation dictates how you act upon it. And how you
hmm,
act upon a situation affects your outcome. So it's thinking about it. Those things create emotions. Those emotions eventually project as action, and those
so true.
actions create your outcomes. So if you want different results, if you don't like the outcomes and the results that you're getting, and tying this into leadership in any way, shape, or form, then as a leader, if you want to change your outcome, if you want to change the people around you, if you want to be more successful, maybe you need to change your perspective, right? You need to change how you think and how you feel.
Yeah,
And what are the belief systems around a situation? Why is your dialogue always saying, I can't do that? I'm not enough. That's not possible for me. Or, good things happen to those people. They don't really happen to me. I always end up, you know, having bad things happen to me, or I end up having, kind of the short end of the stick. And it's like, well, why do you believe that? And what about that can you change? What evidence do you have that's going to prove that that is your consistent outcome? And challenge it and change it because you can.
I mean,
And
I think sometimes you even have evidence, right? Because you've put yourself in that, like, you've created that environment for yourself.
yeah,
You see what I mean? And then we do the thing of saying, well, that's my evidence because every time I try, it doesn't work. So, and like you're saying, it's false evidence, because if you said,
yeah,
okay, I'm gonna, it says it takes 21 days to pick up a new habit.
mm,
And so you say, like, well, just take 21 days of not doing the thing that you're doing and see if you can come up with new evidence. Because so often we will look to the evidence that we have created by our own words and say, well, there's my evidence. And
yeah,
we can use that to justify why I can't, or I won't, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not beautiful enough, and all of that, And I think that's the dangerous thing, because evidence does come. If you're consistently negative, you're gonna have evidence to
yeah.
match, your, like you said, your dialogue.
That's the outcome. And I always say, why is your outcome this way? Why is your results this way? Why do you keep choosing to do the same thing over and over and over? And that's where your belief systems impact, your behavioral habits. And
Yeah,
those are habits. And you keep having the same habits, and now it's like a character trait, and it becomes a part of your personality, and it
yeah.
eventually becomes, a part of your identity, right? Your
Okay.
self-perception of you. If it's negative, because you have negative belief systems, that your negative belief systems about yourself, then that affects your self-esteem, that affects your self-worth. And when you have low self-esteem and you lack value in yourself, and you know you lack a level of worthiness that is necessary for you to cultivate relationships that you want to tell yourself you deserve, but you have to believe that you deserve it, right? Then it shows up in what you allow. It shows up in
Yeah.
what you tolerate. It shows
Okay.
up in whether you ask for a promotion and ask for what you believe you deserve, and whether or
Yeah.
not you set boundaries and things like
So,
that.
yeah.
You say 21 days to make a habit. I always say it takes 30 days to change a habit. And I think that, it takes 90 days to make it a lifestyle,
Yes.
right? Of
A much longer
consistency.
time of consistency.
Consistency. Um, and the thing is that when the part of self-awareness is saying, you know what, I recognize that, I don't speak very kindly to myself. I recognize that I'm more of a pessimist than an optimist. I think of the glass half empty versus half
Yeah.
full. And a lot of people, what they do is they shame themselves, right? Shame doesn't make a difference in your life to move forward. Only love can do that. Love for
Yeah.
yourself, grace for yourself, compassion for yourself,
Yeah.
and look at a situation and say, I've recognized that I have been speaking and thinking a certain way,
Yeah.
and I'm going to unlearn those things. I'm going to extend some grace and some compassion, knowing that it's not necessarily my fault, but I have been making a consistent mistake of not showing up authentically because I don't believe that I can, or I don't feel
Yeah.
like, you know, I deserve to show up in those spaces in that way. And it's okay to make mistakes, because now I can learn from it. And now I can
Exactly.
make a better choice and make
Exactly.
a better decision. And people need to do that a lot more often. How often do you see people doing that?
How often? Very often. I think you have to self-assess all the time, right?
Mhm.
Like you're saying, that you end up realizing, like, hey, I'm actually really speaking negative. And I think what we all need to do, like, periodically, is just like self-assess ourselves. Like, you take your car in for a check, you need to take yourself in for a check and just say, how come, like, do I feel, how do I feel about myself, and how do I feel about this, or whatever. But that pessimistic thing, that some of these things we do inadvertently,
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of sit with yourself and say, why do I always feel like that thing is not going to happen for me? Like, why do I always have a negative reaction to
Mm-hmm.
this? Or why am I always afraid? Or um, why do I always expect the worst outcome?
Yeah.
And I think, like, going back to that risk averse thing I was saying, I know that at one point I had to say to myself, and my background is also in law, so I think there's an element of maybe my conditioning and those things that I mentioned, like an African woman, you're always taught to be careful as a woman. You're taught not to do this, not to do this. And then going in as a lawyer as well. Like, lawyers are risk managers,
Yeah.
essentially, right? That's what we do. We're just higher paid risk managers. But I think one of the things that I started realizing about myself is that I was always calculating the negative. Like, I always was preparing
Mm,
how things would go wrong and the worst case scenario. And then you don't give yourself any latitude to say, well, how would you feel when it actually all goes right? And that was
yeah.
affecting my outcomes, right? Because I was like, oh yeah, but like all of this would go wrong. This is where all the holes are. These are where all the risks are. This is, so I could do an excellent risk analysis,
Yeah.
but it would also then lead with a lot of, you know, I don't think it's actually going to work. And
Mm,
that actually
mm,
affects, what you put in and your outcomes and even how you speak over yourself and over the situation. And
mm-hmm.
so that's something I had to learn for myself to say, you're really starting to sound like you think it's a good thing because you think you're being smart and risk aware and being calculated and measured and all of these good words, but
Mm-hmm.
actually you're actually capping your potential.
Mm, I
you
agree.
know and it's not, again, it's not from a bad place. It's just it slowly creeps up on you, and then suddenly you realize I don't even have any like courage or boldness or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
because I just tap in what I think is possible because I'm so focused on what could go wrong.
Yeah. I always say, how often I ask my clients a lot of times, how often do you do mirror work? Right? Which is when I get up in the morning and I look at myself in the mirror, like, what are the first things that come to mind? How do I
Mm,
speak over my life? What do I say to myself in the mirror? Do I compliment myself? Do I criticize myself?
yeah,
Do I believe I'm going to have a good day? Do I believe something good is going to happen to me? Is that my expectation? Right? And when you say, you know, being limited, I believe that our creator lives in us at all times. And I
mm,
tell myself every day, I am not separated from God, and God is not separated from me. And I have to get into the mindset and the habit of taking the limitations off of God, right? And
yeah,
taking God out of humanity's box.
yeah,
And
your little box that you created.
exactly. And sometimes our like limited and negative belief systems is because we are looking at life through the lens of what other people are doing, you
Yeah,
know? And they say sometimes you'll look at somebody else and they've made it into an avenue or an area in their life, and you don't believe that you can do that. You feel like there must be something special about them or great about them where they were able to do something,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
put those limits on yourself, right? Or you look at the environment that you have. Your environment can negatively impact, right, what you believe about yourself because for example, for me, I grew up in harsh poverty. Nobody was doing anything. I liked different music. I was a straight A student. I was reading different books and studying different things. No one around me was doing that. And I had to fight really, really hard to
yeah,
believe that I can get out of that environment and
mm,
have a better life. I'm not sure exactly what kind of life that's going to be, but I wanted to believe that something better was out there, and
yeah,
trust that, the God in me will allow myself to actually just take the little bitty baby steps to pursue those things, and that God, I always say, God will meet you where you are. So how far down the road do you want to go? If God is going to meet me where I am, right? I don't want God to meet me all the way at the bottom when I know I have the capacity to make a couple of steps towards the middle. Why be afraid to move to the middle and let God meet me in the middle and then take me higher and elevate me higher, right? I need to challenge myself and say, just because that might be true for them, and their belief systems are working out for them, right? Full of negativity, because you get exactly what you believe you deserve, doesn't mean that has to be my outlook. And if I'm not separated from God and God is not separated from me, and I want God to meet me where I am, and I believe I can go up here, right? Then we can't control time, right? Then just take the baby steps and believe this is the step God might meet me at, or this is the step God might meet me at, or this is the step, right? But don't remain stagnant, because if you're stagnant, that I think in this way. Why do I believe this about myself? Why do I speak to myself this way? And what is the reason why I believe I cannot change that? Right?
I think it's so good that you share, I mean, you always so authentically your stories, because I think a lot of people think if I come from a certain background, I can't change at all. But I think the word is like the baby steps. Nothing happens automatically. You don't just wake up and you figured it all out. It's just like doing one step after another, and then always. I think with me sometimes if I'm looking forward and I feel frustrated, I always look back and just say like, okay, you may not be, at X points, but like look how far you've come. If because sometimes we forget to look back and just say like, okay, but I may not be here, but I'm not there, and the baby steps actually. But that's the thing. Like you've got to take those little baby steps, and it doesn't matter where you start from. Just take the baby steps, because you have a completely different life from what from what you're saying, from what you grew up in, right? And what was your community and your environment, and that was a cap. If you chose for it to be a cap, that was a cap for you, right? And you're like, yeah, no, something.
You said, no,
Yeah,
I don't believe that. Yeah, I tell people, oftentimes, hey, look, if you're not curious about yourself and curious about your life and curious about where you're going to go, right? How are you going to make any changes? Most people are very comfortable in familiarity because it's safe. It's like, sticking with the devil, I always say sticking with the devil that you know. And I wrote something down in my journal the other day, and it was healing is expensive. Self-awareness is expensive, right? It's expensive because it might cost you it might cost you your relationships. Sometimes self-awareness might cost you a little bit of peace in the toxic familiarity that you got comfortable with. It's going to challenge you, right? It's going to make you recognize that some of the relationships that you have around you are not healthy, and you're going to have to speak up for yourself, right? It's going to cost you that safety, that negative safety. There's a difference between positive safety and negative safety. The negative safety is, well, none of my friends are doing it, so I'm not doing it. It's tolerating and accepting behavior that reflects the negative belief systems that you have about yourself. So a part of the healing and self-awareness is expensive because, you know, you're going to lose some things, and it's a high risk, but with a greater reward, right? Because
Yes.
the new peace that you'll find will be healthier for you. The new
Yeah.
relationships that you'll cultivate is going to be better for you. You know, you can quit a job that you realize, I'm unfulfilled, I'm unhappy, I'm I'm not getting the things that I'm asking for. I'm not getting my needs met here, and I'm going to go somewhere else. So it's going
Yeah.
to cost you, you know, something you've always
Okay, yeah.
done, and challenge you to open your mind to something that is new, that you haven't experienced because you haven't allowed yourself to experience, but
Mhm.
are worth every single penny of it,
So,
every single bit of it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think like you're saying, healing is definitely costly. I think sometimes it's also, when you are, and maybe this is why people don't like doing it. Sometimes if you sit with yourself, you realize like, I don't even like this part about myself. Like, wow, I didn't realize I was that whatever, you
Mhm,
know. And I
mhm.
think that's part of it. Like that's also a cost because I think it's easier
Yeah.
to sometimes just close your eyes
Mhm.
some of your own behaviors and if you don't have like you see and sometimes those are enhanced because you're in the wrong group or community. You don't have a mentor who can speak truth to you.
Yeah.
You have sometimes people go through that self-awareness when there's a crisis, like you go through a divorce or you get fired
Yeah.
or you get friend dumped, or it's like something happens and then it forces you to say like, how did this happen to me? How did I get here? Right.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's something that we should be doing to ourselves. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes you're just like, I don't really like myself. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation to have with you. And I think it gets easier. I know for me, when I started being more self-aware, it was like, oh God, this is like really awkward. Like, oh, why do I do that? Why do I act like that? And having to self-critique is really, it's very emotionally draining. And I think it's something that you just have to get used to. But I do 100% agree. I think especially when you're younger,
Mhm.
like now I'm older, so I think I'm just more established in my friends. I'm more comfortable with who I am, and
Yeah.
you usually meet people and you've got like a connection, and then other people are just acquaintances or
Yeah.
colleagues and stuff, right? But I think when you're younger, especially as a woman, it is really difficult, just creating those emotional ties and knowing who is healthy.
Mhm.
And sometimes, like you're saying, that costly thing that sometimes you're with somebody, and this is like relationship or like friendship, that is actually not healthy. And just having that presence of mind to separate yourself it's really costly. And
Yeah.
I don't take it like I don't think it's something that is easy to do.
Mhm.
And sometimes, I think we stay in relationships longer than we should because, like you said, it's very comfortable and it's very costly to separate yourself. But I think it's much harder when you haven't got to the point of maturity and being able to say like, actually, I am pro me
Mhm.
first.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then like if me works in this environment, in this job, in this relationship, in this friendship, in this group, in this church, whatever it is. And I think when you're younger, it's just much harder because we're still figuring out who we are, and we don't want to make, you don't want to lose friends, and so
Yeah.
it's very, healing is it's very pricey, but it's
I
very necessary.
Yeah, and I think that, first and foremost, we have to kind of develop a level of self-awareness and acknowledge that, the negative behavioral habits that we have are kind of rooted in those belief systems, and it requires a level of honesty
Yeah.
that some people don't want to do. I always say, you know, the the hardest person to be honest with a lot of times is with yourself. And to be able to challenge those belief systems, it requires that kind of honesty with yourself, and then kind of recognize how the ways in which, your habits kind of manifest in your thoughts and your emotions and your actions, like I said before. And that's the
Yeah.
only way that you'll be able to create the foundation to initiate the change that you want to make. And identifying those like negative habits, you kind of begin the process of challenging underlying belief systems. What's fueling that? Like, what's the origin? What's the story that I'm telling myself? Like the constant monkey chatter that we're going off in our heads and talking about all the time. What is that story that I've created for myself? Who told me that story and why I believe it? And examine that. Is it true? Is it valid? Is it kind of serving me in the ways that I want it to serve me? And allow yourself to think something different, allow yourself to have a different perspective. And that's going to really help with the relationship that you have with yourself, so that you can have a better relationship with other people. And that plays a really big role when it comes to leadership. Let me ask you, especially like as a lawyer, how do you feel, what's your opinion on negative belief systems impacting your ability as a leader? And because we talk about ethical leadership development all the time.
Yeah. I think it's one of the hardest things. And like you're saying, like you have to have your own self-awareness so that you
Mhm.
can build relationship with others, right? And that's why you have to do that work. And what I find is a lot of people who come from negative belief systems, when they lead, it's a lot of micromanaging. So you can
Yeah.
really see from a leadership style what that person actually believes about themselves,
Mhm.
right? If you see somebody who is really comfortable, like I remember going to this meeting with the with an investment company in Ghana,
Mhm.
and the main guy, he's a very senior, very celebrated finance guru, and he walked into the room with I think four of his junior staff, and he
Mhm.
introduced everybody, and firstly he sat in the middle, right,
Mhm.
not at the head of the table. He just sat with his team. So he
Okay.
introduced everybody, and he said, they've done the analysis of the company, and so they're going to lead the meeting. And I was blown away because immediately just that act showed that this is a man who is fully confident, that he's fully self-aware. He's not trying to be, I got to be the boss, I got to be important, I need to be seen,
Mhm.
da, 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 da. Right?
Mhm.
So you always see that belief system. It was very clear how he believed about himself. He did not need to be in the front. He was the boss. He is the boss. But he didn't need to prove it, shout, etc. And so I find like a lot of our belief systems really affect our leadership styles, and a
Yeah.
lot of leaders are not supposed to be in the positions they are,
Yeah.
and they lead through fear, they
Mm.
lead through vision, they
Yeah.
lead through management, right? And that they suppress growth. They don't put the right team around them because they are scared of being overshadowed.
Yeah.
And all of these are rooted in a belief system of those people that is, I am actually not supposed to be a good leader. I'm not a good leader. I'm not supposed to be here. I got here by chance. I am actually not good. I'm actually not handsome. I'm actually not good at this job. And so they mask all of that
Yeah.
with all of these weird actions. And
Yeah.
it's such a toxic environment. And I would say one of my favorite leaders when I was in the bank in London, he made everyone feel heard. He was hands down one of my favorite. I've been really lucky to have incredible bosses, and I've had a handful of weirdos, but incredible bosses. But this guy made everyone feel heard. He didn't
Mhm.
care if you were the most junior in the room or you're the most senior. He was the most senior. He was a global leader,
Mhm.
for our division, but he made everyone feel heard. And it came from a place of great self confidence.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is why it's so important for me, especially for women leaders, that we learn how to build our own confidence because it affects you. You think it's just you, it's not just you. How
No,
you
it's
relate to
not.
yourself is then what spills out. Like you said at the beginning, like the way you love yourself is what spills out to other people,
Yep.
right? You don't stage your love. And so
Yep.
the way you believe in yourself and your abilities, and doesn't mean that as a leader you need to know it all, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that's also this weird perception that you need to have no, you don't. But you build a team around you that helps you know it all. But
Yeah.
I think I feel like a lot of leaders, like I meet a lot of people, and I just think, Lord, they are so insecure, but
Yeah.
you see bravado, and so the first thing you think is like, oh, that guy's really confident. But if
Yeah.
you watch it, if you watch the taunting and the squashing people and the micromanagement and the ruling by division, you
Mm-hmm.
realize, oh, they're actually not secure at all. They're very insecure, and they lead through their insecurity because there's a belief system there that is
Yeah.
actually told them, this, you're not actually good enough,
Yeah.
and they repeat that, and it's really tough. It's really
Yeah.
really tough.
People lead out of ego, right? And I always say, if you don't lead out of ego, lead out of service to
Mm,
others. Create a service that you would want for yourself, you
yeah,
know, and try to see bits and pieces of yourself or family or friends or people that you love, right? In the people that you serve, right? So there's no need to really lead an ego. And in leadership, it requires like a level of vulnerability. You know, negative belief systems often undermine our self-confidence and
yeah,
self-worth as leaders a lot of times, right? And like you said, most people go into these positions already feeling like they're not good enough and I don't have what it takes, or it's just handed to you, so you don't believe that you deserve it. Or some people are afraid of success and they are doing it to people please, and they are in these leadership roles because, you know, their dad did it or their mom did it, or, you know, that's what is expected of them. And that creates a level of self-doubt because, you know, you're really a leader to people please, you
yeah.
know. And
It's
when
dangerous. I think people don't realize how obvious it becomes, and it creates a
yeah.
really difficult working environment
Hmm.
when you have those sort of leaders, and you see it with the high turnovers and very disgruntled workplace,
Hmm.
where the leader, himself or herself, um, is really not a leader.
Yeah.
And this is not imposter syndrome. They really are struggling with inner confidence issues, and it shows up in the way they lead. And it's dangerous because you can have like a great product, a great company, a great team, but
Hmm.
you can lead it into ruin.
Yeah, and here's the thing, like, I'll for me as somebody who runs a company, and I have people that work under me, I always let people know that though I'm a leader, I'm still a human being, I'm still a person. And I think one of the things I think when it comes to negative belief systems is that it can hinder your ability to embrace vulnerability in
Mm,
and courageous in your leadership and how like your leadership style, and feeling like I always have to be in control. I can't show any weakness. I can't ask for
yeah,
help. I have to micromanage. I have to hover and have this image of knowing it all, and not letting people see that, I'm a little stressed, or I don't always know what I'm doing. And that's where my team kind of comes in. It creates like barriers to vulnerability and authenticity, which, affects your connection. And effective leadership usually often requires the ability to be vulnerable, admit mistakes, and ask for support when needed. But if you have a belief system of, you know, I'm not worthy and I don't want anybody to know that I don't feel worthy of this position anyway, you know, that's going to
you're gonna
hinder a
hurt.
whole lot. Those
Yeah,
systems
yeah,
limit your capacity to be compassionate and lead
yeah,
with empathy and compassion. Like, if we harbor beliefs such as like people are inherently untrustworthy and emotions are sign up, weakness, and I have to prioritize results over, relationship with my staff or my employees.
yeah.
And I think it becomes very challenging to connect and understand with the people that you're working with and the people that you're serving. Have you ever had people who, like, especially like politicians, you're supposed to be there to serve the people
Mm,
as a leader, but you are disconnected, from the people, and you don't have empathy for the people that you're supposed to be serving. And I
yeah.
think that leadership is supposed to involve building trust and nurturing the relationships and fostering and supporting the relationships in
Yeah.
like an inclusive environment. But if you have these belief systems of, you know, I'm just going to do this for them, and you know, but you know, people are not trustworthy, or I'm going to, you know, I just want to focus on the results. I just want to focus on ROI. I just want to focus on the money. I just want to focus because, you know, when I have money, then I'll be successful. When I have money, like these are all belief systems. It's
Yeah.
a mindset rather than a growth mindset,
Yeah.
right? And it's, you have to be, a limited belief system, in my opinion, hinders your ability to embrace change, to learn from your failures, and be innovative as leaders because you have a limited mindset,
Yeah.
right? Versus like
And
you
to
said,
be
versus growth
vulnerable.
mindset.
I think that vulnerability is so important, and I think that creates that
Yeah,
ego thing is that
yeah,
being able to say, I don't actually understand this. You
yeah.
know, we see this a lot. You know, that I think especially, you know, when we look at businesses in Africa, there's a sort of, especially for men leaders, like male leaders, that
Hmm.
vulnerability is so hard. And I think it comes from our culture where you are supposed to just know and do and act and not cry and not complain as a man, right? So
Hmm.
they take that into the leadership role, and you just are supposed to just get on with it. And I think some of that is changing now, but I really see that a lot, you know, and that lack of vulnerability. And that is not just from the leader, that's also from us, the people who say you are supposed to lead and you're supposed to get it, and you're not allowed to be vulnerable. And
Yeah.
that's something, it's a really hard burden that
Mhm.
we also as a community push our leaders into, right? So when they fail, you see this a lot in like church leadership,
Mhm.
because they act like demigods. You
Demi.
tell them they are not allowed to fail, and they are like, oh yeah, I'm a demigod, I cannot fail because I am like chosen by God. And
Yeah.
then they fail. And when they fail, we're like,
Exactly. Okay, so hold on.
exactly.
Ron said, as I started my company, leading with an ego was a great concern for me. I did self address and asked myself why I wanted to start a company. I thought that was a good sign that I was on a good track. What did you, Ron? I'm going to ask you a question is, you know, when you say leading with an ego was a great concern for me, how did you recognize, like, how were you able to bring a level of awareness to yourself and say, oh my God, I, I'm I'm leading with ego. I want this career out of my ego versus purpose and passion and loving
Yeah.
what I do to serve other people. Like,
Yeah.
answer that in the chat box. I would love to know that. And you said,
Yeah.
you know, I thought that was a sign that I was on a good track. What were the signs? You know, what else were the signs that you were able to catch? Wardell, love you. I love you too. And I'm so glad people ask all the questions that you have.
Yeah.
Ron said, I
I
didn't
love
want
that.
to
I
be
think
a
that's the self
boss.
awareness thing we were saying, that, you know, and I think we all make mistakes. Like all of us, you know, today I was like, oh, maybe I should change this. And I think that's like life, right? We should always be consistently trying to be better and trying to self assess ourselves and saying,
Yeah,
okay, maybe I did this wrong. Like, how can I get help as well? You know, how can I get a mentor? A
yeah,
mentor doesn't have to be like for the rest of your life. You can have a mentor for just a season, or to transition from one, you know, area to another, and just have somebody who you can say like, hey, you know, I feel like I'm doing this, and can I just get your perspective on it? But I
yeah,
love that he said that, you know, I recognize this thing about myself, and I'd love to see, you know,
yeah.
what triggered.
He said, I didn't want to be a boss. Elaborate on that. Ron, elaborate on that. You didn't want to be a boss because, you know, being a boss is being a leader, right? What do you mean being a supervisor? You didn't want to have a team to manage. Like, what's your idea of being a boss? Because that's like a little, that's a fancy word, you know, girl boss. Everybody wants to be a boss, boss this, boss that, right? So one of the things I think in terms of when it comes to women, especially in how women struggle with negative belief systems in the world that we live in, I think that a lot of times women face unique challenges, right? From societal norms and expectations
Mhm.
and, like systemic inequalities that contribute to negative belief systems and kind of hinder their collective growth. I know that that has happened to me, from an early age. I tend to internalize like beliefs that kind of perpetuate gender stereotypes and limit my
Mm,
potential of what it is that I believe I can be, because I don't see other women, especially like other women of color, in those positions. And sometimes it made me think, oh, well, I might not be capable, or maybe that's not good, or maybe I should just be quiet and accept what I get and be, the
yeah.
whole submissive. And I think that those beliefs can erode women's and men sometimes self-confidence, and
Yeah.
create a level
Yeah.
of self-doubt that wasn't there, and undermine women's abilities to kind of embrace their full potential, because now they have this limited mindset.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I remember, when I started out in law, I was working in London,
Mhm,
and the area of law. My background is like corporate law,
mhm.
but in that period, I was doing a lot of stuff which is like heavy transactional, like
Yeah,
building transactional. So I do a lot of transactional work, like deals. But at that stage, it was like PPPs and like really, So I remember we were doing this huge deal, which was like a huge infrastructure project
yeah,
for the army.
yeah,
And we went into this huge all party meeting. And already, again, I'm like in London. So I'm like only black in the room. And I remember walking in the room, and it was like all these older white male, they're all 50 plus white men.
yeah.
And I walked in and I was grabbing some tea for myself, because you always have the cutest tea and coffee and biscuits and cakes when you go to legal meetings.
Yeah.
This is pre-COVID, so this is like a long time ago, where we really, like, lawyers were treated really well. But I remember somebody asking me to make them tea, and they were so confused that I was not the tea person, right? They just thought I was like a staff
Are you the
in
help? They're expecting you to be the help?
in the law firm. We were at another law, like I was in law firm, but we were in another law firm at the huge conference room. And this white man walks up to me and he just expects me to be the tea person. And I was kind of shocked, because I was kind of like, and the thing is, I don't actually mind making, like, I would always make tea or coffee for my boss or whatever, and like vice versa. My boss would always be like, hey, should I grab you a coffee? It just wasn't a big deal. And it was just so
Yeah.
confusing. He was super, super embarrassed. And you're sitting in the room, I think I was one of two women,
Oh
and I was
no.
also the only black person. And I feel like those kind of um, experiences can really shape, because I was kind of embarrassed for myself, embarrassed for him, confused, like awkward. And
Why
then
were
you
you
remember,
embarrassed for yourself though?
well, no, because the first thing you feel is like, oh, why do I look like a tea person? Because I'm like a black chick. But I
Mm,
mean, mostly the embarrassment wasn't him. Let me be honest. But you're embarrassed for yourself, because you're like, why are you calling me out? And then you're sitting in this meeting and feeling like very awkward
mhm,
because you stand out. And I feel like that's one of those things as a woman that you always, and it's changed a lot. Like, this is like ages ago. This is like the start of my career, where
mhm,
it was really still awkward to be a woman in certain settings, and certainly to be a black woman.
mhm,
And you constantly had to jump over that hoop, and feel like you had to explain yourself and explain
mhm.
yourself, and always be good. Well, not even good. You had to always be excellent, because the perception was already starting from -10.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like that's what a lot of women we deal with. Like, you're really supposed to be emotional and blah, blah, blah. That's a whole list of things that we're supposed to do or be. And so I think one of the pressures that we have as women,
Mhm.
of color, is that when you walk into a room, you feel like, I am starting not from zero, I'm starting from -10.
Yeah.
And I need to get up to zero where the other women start,
Mhm.
and then work my way up. And that's a lot of labor for us, right? And that's like a mental
Yeah.
brains. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's getting better, but you know, you still kind of feel like that sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think now we're more, obviously there's also a whole tribe of women. We're more confident. I'm
Yeah.
also older, so now it really don't care what
Don't
you
care. I
right?
think that like you feel like embarrassed for yourself when it comes to the situation with asking for help. I don't think there's any embarrassment in there. In the professional realm, most of the time though, women tend to face like barriers and biases and things that I think reinforce negative belief systems about ourselves. Like we encounter stereotypes like, women shouldn't have those leadership roles, or women are too emotional to be able to have those, and
Yeah.
should focus on, caregiving and all those other things, right? And sometimes we can adopt someone else's belief systems for us and make them our own, such as those, like, and those belief systems can limit opportunities for women. It can undermine women's confidence and perpetuate kind of like the gender inequality in the workplace. I think that those belief systems, especially the negatives that we adopt from other people, impact the relationship that we have with ourselves and our ability to establish healthy boundaries as women, especially in the workplace. And it forces us sometimes to struggle with those feelings of unworthiness and fear of rejection, or the need to people please and care give in the workplace. There's a lot of emotional labor in the workplace, which can lead to self-sacrifice, and it makes it difficult to assert your needs and desires at work and in relationships too. And those beliefs also, like I said, hinders the development and connections that is necessary to have healthy relationships, all throughout. And so, okay, well, Wardell said, as a leader, we aren't allowed to show vulnerability. We are required to know all the answers and always have it together. And one mistake can cause mistrust in your employees, right? And he said, I choose to form a team with my company. That way, all the weight isn't on one person and multiple brains are in motion. I love that. Multiple brains are in motion. And we said that before. It's important to be vulnerable as a leader. You don't have to have it all together. Because if you make yourself like what you call a demigod, right? You, as a leader, you're afraid to be seen as a human and to be seen as, you make mistakes and you shame yourself. And I think shaming yourself supports any of the negative beliefs that you might have, and you knock yourself all the way down from this demigod when you were human the whole time, with the capacity as you learn. And like I said, it's adopting those negative belief systems. And as Black women and Black men, a lot of times being vulnerable at work and not feeling like you have to have it all together and you have to know all the answers, because most of the time you get into these spaces that other people feel and believe you don't deserve, right? And it takes a lot of strength, right? To hold tight to the mindset of worthiness and that you deserve, even when you get into those spaces, to tune out what other people's opinions about what they believe about you has nothing to do with your capacity and what you're capable of doing as a leadership and as a person in that role. You have a seat at that table because you were born worthy of it, right? And God is meeting you where you are by opening up the door of opportunities so that you can be the authentic version of yourself to serve and have purpose as a leader, as a role model. That's not just at work. That's in your family, that's in your friendships. There's always the leader in the friendship, right? As us as moms, as dads, there's still leadership roles that you have, and you have to be vulnerable. As a mom, I'm vulnerable. As a friend, I have to be vulnerable. I have to be human. That doesn't make me less of a person, right? It brings a level of empathy, and we are consistently teaching those around us, what belief systems and negative, condition programming is, by how we operate and how they get to experience us in their life. Does that make sense?
I think we have to really Two things. One, we really have to be more vulnerable from the get-go. And I think when we go into leadership positions, let's not start as demigods and then realize, oops, I'm going to make a mistake. I think when you go in and say, hey, you know what, I'm so excited about this. This is what I really love doing. Like, these are my strengths.
Yeah.
I am not really good at this.
Yeah.
And when you come with that approach, people will surround you. So when you make a mistake, the mistake is not a mistake. It's like, hey, you know what? Like, he wrote that email and it wasn't really good, but he already said straight up, I'm not really good at writing, or I don't really like public speaking. So that is my weakness. Who can cover me? I'm really good at, okay, how can you help me do that? And I feel like if we walked into leadership positions, and like you're saying, not just in the workplace, this is really essential in the workplace because it matters, there's money and there's trust, etc. But even in the family, like, I'm not good at this.
Yeah.
But I'm really good at this, and being more authentic in our conversations at the start, not in the middle when there's an issue, but at the start. And the other thing I was going to say, when I coach on leadership, I coach a lot on like cultural leadership, and one of the big things that we have as people of color is shame. And that is something that is like inherent in our culture, and it's something that we have to recognize. We are so shame driven. Europeans are more guilt driven. We're not guilt driven, we're shame driven. So when we make decisions, and like you're saying, when you walk into the workplace and you really feel like people already feel like I'm not supposed to be here, but because we are shame driven, we tend to be more hesitant about doing anything to perpetuate what somebody already thinks, right? We are like, I better just sit still. I better not do this. And then you end up not taking advantage of certain things. And so one of the things, when we're coaching, it's always saying to the girls, you've got to learn how to speak confidently, how to communicate, and move away from that place of shame, and even be okay to make a mistake, because you're going to get things wrong before you get them right. Every single leader does that. And so when you're sitting in a meeting, especially in a mixed setting, like in a global setting, and all of us will, you're always going to work with other cultures, whatever, you need to be able to own the space and say, okay, I'm going to feel really embarrassed about saying this or asking this, but I need to ask this question. I need to do this. And put yourself out there intentionally, even if it feels uncomfortable, until you get to a point that it does, it becomes easy. And ask everyone, but because we're so shame driven, we actually make decisions like on how to reduce shame. Really,
Whole topic.
it's inherent in our culture, and it's something we have to recognize and then say, okay, I'm not, again, that is a cultural belief system. When you do this, you're going to be ashamed. When you do this, it's going to be shame. Da, 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 da. And we do community shame as well. We don't do shame for ourselves.
Yeah, we do.
You're always carrying the community on your back.
We do. We always do. Oh, Ron responded. Oh, I'm looking at the time. Oh, we are over time. But before we cut anything out, I'm gonna answer Ron. His response to your question was, I was going to say, coming from an educational background, I witnessed educators and administrators desperate to fight to keep their jobs and use their position to flex their egos. So I find it important to check myself to make certain I was on a good track. And I want to know that the product I build will be done in a safe space. That's how he checked his ego. That's fantastic. And that is perfect. And that's very similar to the exact same thing that we're talking about in leading with ego and the scrambling of, flexing the ego because, I have this position over you and so on and so forth. So, guys, this is the theme for the month. So we're going to be talking about that in depth. We'll have another conversation. We'll do it on Instagram Live on, I believe, the 23rd. So stay tuned and pop in for that. It'll be around the same time, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 12 Central time, 1 Eastern Standard Time, and I believe 7 p.m. Central African time, right? So we're on it. If you guys have any other questions, leave comments in the chat. We're going to save this live. And let me know what you guys think around this topic, and if there's something that you feel like we left out and that you want us to talk about in the next one, by all means share it and let us know, and we will cover it for sure. You know, until then, guys, make sure you make life matters, right, in your life and in all the experiences that you have in your relationships. Okay. See you guys next time.
Ciao.
Ciao.